All right, if this is the first time you're clicking on one of my videos, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. And if you are a returning viewer, perhaps you've been following my recent Big Marshall knife exploration journey. And in recent videos in that series, you've seen me kind of step away from cold steel products. Unthinkable, I know. But I feel like I need to give other knife manufacturers a fair shake, or yeah, maybe it's just an excuse to expand my collection. But you've also seen me review some really big knives. Knives that definitely cross the line into being short swords. Now, from my Marshall experience, those make sense because I've spent time with Otanto, Wakizashi, Chinese butterfly swords, and also, yes, full-size swords, sabers, and cutlasses. There is a lot of crossover happening there. But I've also had a lot of experience with Marshall, well, shall we say, knife-sized knives. So when it comes to a fixed blade, maybe we're talking about 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 inches on the outside. So here I am thinking, well, what if I picked up a knife that had the features of what's become the classic Western-style Bowie, but isn't so much of a short sword, actually, you know, more traditionally knife-sized. So let's take a look at the Baron Sun Gold Rush Bowie, the small one. Out of the box edge, I'm going to say is pretty impressive. Sandvik 12C27M steel that my test files are saying is somewhere above 60 HRC. It is shaving sharp. Let's take a look at it against a little paper. Yeah. How about some cardboard? Yeah, that's a razor. Let's talk about the sheath. It's a fairly nicely finished brown leather. There are no rivets, just stitches. It's pretty slim. Comes with a swiveling belt loop on what I'm concerned with might be a bit of, well, too small a rivet there. That is also the rivet that secures the retention strap. Now that retention strap can be swiveled over either way depending on which way you want it carried. So that's kind of a nice feature. But one of the things you're going to notice is they cut the top of the sheath very square even though the guard is not. So it doesn't quite fit in there in my head just right. But I think that would be an easy fix with a bit of trimming. Now how sturdy is this sheath going to be being that it's just stitched? I'm also a bit concerned that the leather, well, it is fairly thick, but maybe not thick enough given how sharp that tip is. I do tend to feel myself snagging a bit when I resheath, and I do have some fear that I'm going to do, well, something I did with my Gerber Mark II once upon a time and actually stick the blade through the sheath. Not looking forward to the moment that happens. Another odd thing about the sheath that hit me the moment that I opened the box, it really smells strongly of something like kerosene, so I'm not sure what they treated or preserved the leather with. Before we get into my impact testing and we talk about Marshall handling, let's go over specs, fit, finish, build quality. And one thing I feel like I have to mention up front is, at least on the version I got, hear that? The guard is a little bit loose. We talked about the steel, the hardness, took a look at the out-of-the-box edge. We'll see how it holds up in testing. But the first number I'm going to throw out at you is about $91 US is what I picked this up for at Chicago Knife Works, and I'll put the link in the description below. Now this is the shorter blade, and yes, spoiler alert, I do have the bigger one on order. But this one, I'm measuring this blade, well, total blade length at 7 3/4 inches, so 19.5 centimeters. Blade width at the widest point, 1.75 inches, so about 4.5 centimeters. And thickness at the spine, and there's no distal taper, it's just kind of a slab, is 4 millimeters. Now I feel like the blade is shaped really well. All the lines are crisp. I do like that flat saber grind versus a hollow grind, and still haven't decided whether I'm going to try to put an edge on the clip, back of the clip point. But moving down, did I mention the guard's loose? Shrinking this S-curve guard down, we'll talk about this in handling, is potentially both a good and a bad thing. But did I mention it's loose? Anyway, Cocobolo scales, and I have complained with, well, bigger knives that come with really square, chonky grips, how uncomfortable they are, and I immediately take them to my sanders and round them off, make them fit my hands. Now, these grips look very square, right? But between the size of the grip and the fact that they took the time to taper and round everything, I'm going to say this actually feels really good in my hand. Everything down this end is, well, except for the fact that the guard is loose, is very well finished, very clean, no gaps, no hot spots. It's secured with 2 pins. We'll see how it holds up under impact. Now, some people have mentioned in reviewing this knife that the grip is a little short. All right. That is in here only 3.5 inches, about 8.5 centimeters. So yeah, with my medium width hands, it's pretty hand filling. If you have bigger hands than mine, that might indeed be a struggle for you. It is nice that you have the hook at the bottom to retain your hand in chopping, and we'll see how it feels in chopping under impact. But overall length, 12 inches, 30.5 centimeters. Weight, only 12 ounces. 340 grams, so it feels pretty light. Where's your point of balance on this thing? Between the scales and the guard, it's actually sitting pretty much right there, maybe a centimeter ahead of the guard. So let me go ahead and see how it does in my impact tests, and then we'll check the results and talk about my thoughts on Marshall handling. All right, here we are post-tests. How did it do? And I got to add my caveat in here that if you're looking for hard field craft, bushcraft testing, you're not going to find that on my channel. It's not what I do, not what I'm about. Hopefully I can give you the collector and the Marshall practitioner's perspective, but I do run my blades through a series of impact and durability tests to see how they hold up to, well, hitting and stabbing into things, and how does that feel in my hand? How does it translate that impact back into me? So test number 1, thrusting into my Pell, stab him. Stab him is multiple layers of thick cardboard over a couple of inches of compressed brown paper bag paper over wood. And it was really comfortable. Forward grip, reverse grip, and I have to say I am really becoming a fan with this particular geometry of blade of flipping it around edge towards me, North American Bowie style, for thrusting and stabbing. Yeah, it's just working for me in some very interesting ways. Flipped it around into reverse grip for stabbing that way. It was all very comfortable. Penetration was pretty impressive. Next test. Some people consider this one too abusive. Slashing and hacking into a piece of hard bamboo. Sometimes it's some intentionally bad angles. I'm looking to see if I can easily induce a chip or a roll in a fragile edge. And I was a bit worried about this one. And I did it in forward grip and reverse grip. And the result was, at the end, there was maybe a little microscopic section of glinting right there that immediately disappeared as soon as I ran it over a ceramic rod. So no significant damage whatsoever. Now moving it around and hitting stuff, yeah, that guard is definitely rattling. Did I mention the guard's loose? Next test, I took it to shaving on some boards, and yeah, this is a nice shavy, slicey tool. One thing I did off camera is I had a whole bunch of cardboard from recent deliveries, and I'll talk about this in my side-by-side knife comparisons. But I put a couple of knives to see which one was the best at slicing through the cardboard, and of the selection I tested, this one was far and away the best razor blade for doing that. Took it to chopping into some wood. And this was, again, more about what the wood might do to the blade and how that would feel kicking back into my hand. Not only was it comfortable, and the guard didn't get any looser. Did I mention the guard was loose? But for the size and weight of the knife, it's a surprisingly effective chopper. And I didn't do any batoning with it because I don't really feel like it's built for that. Any damage? Well, I think going through the cardboard was probably the hardest thing on the finish of the knife. I don't know if you can see any of that kind of, well, barely there scuffing that could probably disappear with a quick treatment of Mother's Mac. Would I make any modifications to this knife? Let's talk about that. Well, if the grip scales ever fail, yeah, I'm probably going to replace those and work on tightening up that guard. Might still put that back edge on the clip point. Haven't done it yet, but the way I tend to like to use these, that might serve me pretty well. I'm a little reluctant to do it just yet, but that might be a to be continued. I did make one change though, and that was beveling this corner of the sheath just a little bit, and the result of that now is that, yes indeed, it does fit in there really well. Speaking of fits very well, before we move on to martial handling, I do want to give you guys a close-up look at a few things that I consider features of this particular knife's grip and guard geometry. Compared to some of the other knives with somewhat chunkier guards that I'm not as comfortable doing some of these things with. And one thing is, in forward grip, whether we're talking handshake or hammer, locking my thumb over the top of the guard. Now obviously, I'm not concerned with a blade coming in and using the guard to protect my hands from that incoming edge. What I'm looking to do here in the trade-off is get a much firmer grip on the knife for not only stabbing, but hacking and slashing. Yeah, really feels like I can lock my hand in, and that is also something I was using quite a bit when I was using this as a utility tool. Speaking of comfort in the guard, flipping it around edge towards me, well, not only can I still lock my thumb up, but some of these S-curve guards, depending on the shape, might come around and dig into my hand. This one doesn't. It seems to hug my hand pretty well without creating any hot spots or hooks. So that's a good thing. Speaking of hook, all right, in the reverse grip, if you prefer actually having your edge turned around towards you, one thing this S guard can function as, and some people actually really like its function this way, is that particular quillin fitting into the heel of your hand that way and kind of locking in there just gives you some extra stability in this grip. And if you've got this part of the knife sharpened, you've got a lot of options here. So let's go ahead and talk about my impressions for its martial applications. All right, unflattering waistline view so we can talk about carrying real quick. Now, could I just shove this whole thing in my belt Facone style? Absolutely, and I have been, but I've also been trying to give the carry strap a chance. Now, strong side versus off side, I prefer strong side, edge facing forward, and the sheath does not give me that option. But a couple of options it does give me. The swivel does allow this to get itself out of my way as I'm moving around, including, yes, sitting down, which obviously I like to do a lot, but it's a little too much. It's almost if you can see it, like a fidget spinner. It just wants to, yeah, it just wants to keep going. And because of the balance where that swiveling point is versus the balance of the blade, it doesn't like being upright. So as soon as I start moving around, it's like that, or like that, or somewhere I don't necessarily want it to be. And I am worried about that swiveling point eventually failing. Another thing I'm worried about failing, well, I'll get to that in a second. But okay, thumb brake pretty positive. I do have to get the strap out of the way. Now I did move the strap around to the spine side so it's not getting cut up as I draw the blade. Edge is really keen, which we're going to get back to when we talk about the sheath concern. So drawing, I could rotate it back this way and draw it straight behind me. Don't have to clear my arm too far behind my body, so that's nice. Putting it away though, we'll get back to that concern. I could draw it in the ice pick, which is going to be edged towards me. I still have not sharpened that clip point yet, but I do like the way it locks my hand in there. Sinking that guard into the heel of my hand. Talk about that again in handling. Can I flip my hand around and cavalry draw it? Yes, but sometimes I do get the snag that happens. This is a very slim sheath. There's not a lot of clearance. It really does hug the blade. Now it's improving with break-in, but I mentioned this before with knives that really widen out here. Sometimes I get a heck of a snag when I go to draw. If I don't get that angle of draw just right, it'll catch about halfway through and it becomes like a two-stage process, which is not the most comfortable thing. But, okay, my concern. Already the sheath is suffering damage. Why? Because of the belly of that blade and the sharpness of the tip combined. It is cutting the heck out of the sheath. I've already almost put the tip through the side of the sheath a couple of times. And yes, the belly is cutting up the mouth of the sheath. I have to really consciously sheath it very cleanly to avoid that. And sometimes it does get uncomfortably stuck in something it shouldn't be stuck in. So I think I'm going to be making a different sheath for this. Let's talk martial handling, and spoiler alert, getting right to it, I really like how this feels in my hand, how it moves around. Also, cutting capacity, awesome. Thrusting, awesome. Yeah, it does certain things very well in all sorts of different orientations. So handshake grip, hammer grip, the slashing, the chopping, the cutting. And the interesting phenomenon is I have to remind myself how long this blade is. Sometimes by putting it side by side with other medium to large knives, it just feels smaller than it is, if that makes any sense. Yeah, I feel like I've got more like a 5 or 6 inch blade in my hand versus a 7 3/4. Yeah, it just doesn't feel like that. So, quick, light, but still has good authority in cutting, slashing, thrusting, stabbing. Now, do I feel like I could use the flat to strike with? Well, it doesn't have a lot of mass for doing that. Spine clip point. Okay, so flipping it around, edge towards me, North American Bowie style. I'm really, really starting to appreciate the mechanics, the geometry of this grip for thrusting and stabbing. The way that just puts the tip on where I want it with a lot of penetration, a lot of authority behind it. For some reason, compared to this seems to be superior with certain kinds of blade shapes. Have not sharpened that clip point yet, but that would be very effective for those sorts of strikes as well, which also come into play with the blade facing away from you when you just do your back cutting. Now, it does have enough guard that I feel like it's got some hand protection for catching an incoming weapon. Not necessarily enough length or mass to do it. I prefer something that's at least, I use the Matt Easton where he says he needs at least 9 inches for that. And if you watch Matt Easton's channel, he is like the king of the double entendre. So yeah, Mike also needs at least 9 inches. So maybe in a pinch, but yeah, it's something I'm going to be more evasive with. Counter slashing, counter cutting, counter thrusting, relying on whatever my left hand is doing for that enhancement, or using this as the offhand weapon, having something that's got more offensive and defensive capacity in the strong hand. We'll talk about those options going forward. But yeah, snap cutting, very quick in the snap cut. Just loves moving in my hand, and I could use the extreme of locking my thumb above the guard to get that extra firmness for close in cutting, slashing, chopping, stabbing. I can also use the hook. There's not a lot of room here, so when I'm talking about choking up and choking down, you're talking about barely a centimeter's worth of action there in terms of shift in my grip, maybe a quarter of an inch. But yeah, it does retain my hand if I want to slide a little bit back away from the guard. So that's nice. What about reverse grip? Okay, I can both pinch flip it and use my patented finger twirl, which I don't recommend because it's not very secure. But yeah, it moves from a forward to reverse grip for me pretty readily. And in the reverse grip, I have my two options. Edge away from me, slashing here is really nice with the shape of that belly. And yeah, stabbing was pretty impressive. But flipping it around edge towards me, I haven't sharpened that back edge yet. But if I did, it would have some nice hooking action here, while it does have that back cut action this way. And yeah, stabbing geometry in this blade orientation, like I said, I'm really starting to like it. So, all right, I do have the bigger version on the way. Haven't received it yet. I am really eager to see, well, what that one feels like and how that one performs. Because this one, it's also, you have to take into account, even though it's all kind of shiny and Marshall looking, it also proved itself to be a really good utility use knife. It's sturdy. It is really, really, really sharp. I've done a lot of different kinds of tasks with it. It's a handy knife to have, and that could ease certain people's fears of you having something like this, carrying something like this. You can point out, okay, it's a tool. It's a tool. Could you use tools as weapons? A lot of them, yes. Discussion for another time. But yeah, it has good application balance between tool and Marshall implement, which is a nice feature. But before this gets too long, I'm also hoping that maybe the bigger version doesn't have the, probably going to name the knife Clicky. Did I mention the guard was loose? Yeah. Has it gotten a little looser with use? Maybe a little bit. That concerns me. Might have to talk to Bear & Sons and see if there's an easy fix for that. And if so, that'll be in the to be continued. But otherwise, if you have this knife or other Bear & Son products or other big Bowie knives that you want to talk about, or medium-sized Bowie knives that you want to talk about, let's get our conversation going as always in the comments. Also, as always, thank you for watching, following my journey, subscribing to the channel, liking the videos, and I do hope to see you back for where this journey's going.